Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are stepping back into an empire where silk shimmered like starlight, where golden corridors stretched endlessly, and where the quiet breath of one frightened girl could alter the fate of an entire dynasty. Yes, this is the story of the Sui court, a palace so magnificent it could blind the eye, yet so cruel it could break the soul. And tonight, we speak of the whispered trial that determined everything: the virginity test. Now, let's be honest, in our modern world, when you hear the phrase virginity test, you probably roll your eyes, and maybe even mutter, "Oh, come on, that's not even scientific." You're right, it wasn't. But in the age of Emperor Yang, science had little to do with it. It was power, fear, and the delicate game of survival. You probably won't survive 2 days if you were a girl in that harem, unless you had the wit of a fox and the silence of a shadow. Before we walk into that glittering palace, I need to ask you something. Like, subscribe, and leave me a comment with your city and the time you're listening. Who knows, you might find another night owl in your same neighborhood, also curled up in bed, whisper listening to this story. Because tonight is not just a story, it's a community of listeners across the world, bound by history's strangest tales. So, are you ready? Let us slip through the carved dragon gates of Daxing, the capital of the Sui, and let me tell you what happened when innocence, real or imagined, determined not just a girl's life, but the very stability of an emperor's throne. The story begins in the year 610. The empire of Sui had reached its zenith under Emperor Yang, second ruler of the dynasty. His halls were swollen with gold, his armies had carved highways and canals across China, and his pride reached as high as the Jade Emperor himself. But inside those walls, beneath the veils of embroidered silk, fear reigned in silence. To virginity test, what a phrase to even whisper. It was not official law, you see. No scroll from the imperial archives will tell you, yes, this is how the test was done. But the women knew. The eunuchs knew, and Emperor Yan himself, suspicious and obsessed with control, demanded it. The ritual was conducted by midwives and physicians, with ceremonies as elaborate as if one were summoning gods. Imagine a long jade table, red silk curtains trembling as the summer wind carried the scent of magnolia blossoms inside, and behind the curtain a girl, trembling, being examined for purity. One wrong word, one hint of imperfection, and her fate was sealed. But this was not simply about chastity. Oh no, it was about loyalty. To Emperor Yan, a woman untouched meant loyalty untouched. She belonged wholly to him. A woman who failed the test, whether truly guilty or unjustly accused, was branded forever, unworthy of the dragon's embrace, unworthy of bearing imperial heirs, unworthy of life itself. Now, before you think this is just a story of cruel men and powerless women, let me warn you, these women were not lambs led to slaughter. They were foxes, phoenixes, tigresses in silk robes. They whispered alliances at night, traded secrets like pearls, and some even manipulated the very tests that sought to break them. And in the heart of this empire, one such girl would change everything. Her name, well, we will call her Lianhuo, meaning lotus blossom, for the true names of concubines are often lost to history. She was 17, plucked from a riverside village where her laughter once echoed across water lily. She never thought the emperor's hand would reach her small world, yet here she stood, drawn into the whirlpool of court life. Her beauty was not the sharp kind that cut like jade, but the soft kind, the type that lingered in memory. But it was not beauty that brought her here, it was fate, and fate is rarely merciful. The night before her test, Lianhua could not sleep. Around her, dozens of other girls lay in their jeweled chambers, whispering prayers to gods who had long since stopped listening. Servants bustled silently, carrying basins of perfumed water, preparing robes of white silk, the color of both purity and death. Because in this palace, the two were often the same. Do you hear the silence? That is the silence of a girl realizing her body is no longer her own, that her worth is measured not by her mind, not by her heart, but by the whispers of others. Yet, within Lianhua's trembling hands, there was something no emperor, no eunuch, no midwife could measure: will. And it was that will which would lead us through this story of terror, duty, betrayal, and, perhaps, redemption. But wait, before we move further, let me sprinkle a little reality check. Historians still argue, did the Sui court truly enforce virginity tests? Some argue it was merely rumor, whispered by Tang chroniclers eager to paint Emperor Yan as a tyrant. Others insist it happened, hidden behind silk curtains, which is true. But that is the beauty of history. It is often less about certainty, and more about the shadows it casts. For now, take my hand, step deeper into the corridors of jade and gold. The emperor waits, the midwives sharpen their gaze, and Lianhua takes her first breath on the path that will decide not only her fate, but perhaps the fate of a dynasty. The palace of Daxing, ladies and gentlemen, was not merely a home, it was a world within walls. Imagine corridors lined with vermilion lacquer, dragon motifs curling like serpents across wooden beams, and lanterns glowing like captured stars. But inside those silken halls, where laughter should have fluttered, silence clung like cobwebs. Every girl who entered the harem understood one thing: beauty could crown you, but suspicion could kill you. The harem was not a single chamber, but a labyrinth. Hundreds of concubines were arranged in a hierarchy as strict as military ranks. At the pinnacle stood the empress, glittering in her phoenix crown, followed by the favored concubines, then the lesser ones, each struggling for a glance, a smile, or even a shadow of attention from Emperor Yang. Every robe stitched with gold thread meant nothing if the emperor's eyes did not linger. But the rules were suffocating. A concubine could not speak unless spoken to. She could not leave her quarters without permission. Meals were counted, jewels were monitored, letters were forbidden. And hovering above all these restrictions was the dreaded virginity test. It was performed whenever new girls arrived, or when an old rumor of impropriety stirred. It was not law carved in stone, but it was ritual carved into fear. Historical records, sparse as they are, describe the Sui Palace as a place of extravagance unmatched. Emperor Yan had ordered the construction of vast pleasure gardens, artificial lakes, and halls where one could walk for hours without seeing an end. But beneath the splendor, there was hunger. The empire was cracking under the weight of forced labor and endless wars, and the women of the palace often felt this pressure first. A girl brought into the harem was not only a decoration, but a pawn, part of a system that promised loyalty through control of her very body. Now, let me pause and let you breathe. You're probably thinking, this feels more like a gilded prison than a palace, and you'd be right. But what's fascinating, and somewhat ironic, is how many outside the palace envied those very girls. To the common villager, being chosen meant unimaginable fortune, silk robes, endless banquets, servants at one's command. They did not see the locked doors, the constant surveillance, the unbearable loneliness. They did not hear the sound of a girl crying into her embroidered pillow because tomorrow she would face a test that could condemn her. And yet within this suffocating system, pockets of humanity thrived. Servants whispered gossip like sparrows, eunuchs, though fear, often became secret allies. And the concubines themselves, those delicate flowers in their gilded pots, grew roots in secret places. They shared songs from their hometowns, embroidered hidden messages into silk sleeves, even exchanged coded glances across courtyards. It was a world of performance, yes, but also of cunning. On one particular night, before the summer lantern festival, the palace seemed alive with unease. New girls had just arrived, their eyes wide as deer caught in torchlight. Among them was Lianhua, our riverbank girl, clutching the embroidered pouch her mother had slipped into her hands before the soldiers took her away. Inside that pouch was a pressed lotus petal, faded but fragrant, reminding her of home. While others adjusted their jeweled hairpins, Lianhua pressed the pouch against her heart, whispering to herself that she must not forget who she was. In the harem, survival required masks. A girl had to learn when to smile, when to bow, when to let her eyes glisten just enough to catch the emperor's attention, and when to lower them to avoid the jealousy of others. But beneath those masks, the fear of the test was constant. Whispers traveled faster than the evening wind. Did you hear about the last one? She fainted halfway. She never returned. What if they lie? What if the midwives accuse us even if we are innocent? And that, my friends, was the cruelest part. The test was less about truth than about power. A jealous rival could plant a rumor, and suddenly the midwife's gaze turned sharp. A eunuch bribed by another concubine could whisper doubts, and the girl's fate was sealed before she even set foot on the jade floor. Innocence was not a shield, it was a gamble. The eunuchs themselves were both feared and mocked. Some strutted with the arrogance of gatekeepers, for they held the emperor's trust, while others seemed almost pitiable, shadows of men forced into lives of servitude. Yet, every girl knew, a eunuch's word could decide her destiny. And so they were flattered, bribed, even befriended. Imagine walking through that hall, the echo of your silk shoes against marble, the scent of incense curling in the air, the sound of distant zithers plucked by trembling fingers. At first glance, it is paradise, but listen closely, and you will hear it: the sigh of fear, the gasp of envy, the silent scream of girls who knew tomorrow might end their story before it began. And in the center of this labyrinth sat the emperor himself. Yon of Sui, handsome in the way a carved statue is handsome, cold, flawless, unyielding. He believed himself chosen by heaven, yet he could not sleep without suspicion gnawing at his heart. To him, loyalty was fragile, and purity was proof. That is why the virginity test became his whispered trial. Because in his mind, if a woman could betray her purity, she could betray the throne. For Lianhua, the palace was overwhelming, but her eyes held a quiet resilience. She watched, she listened, she learned. And though fear cold in her chest, she carried her mother's lotus petal as though it were a shield. Little did she know that simple pressed flower would one day become the silent witness to a moment that would shake the palace itself. So, here we leave the silken hall of secrets for now, but remember it well. Because it is not just a stage, it is a trap, a labyrinth, a mirror of power. And it is here, among gold and fear, that our story will grow darker, more dangerous, and infinitely more intriguing. Lianhua had never seen marble floors before. Back home, her toes had kissed mud, soft and warm from the river sun. She had known the cool rush of water, the scent of lotus blooming on the breeze, and the songs her mother sang while bending over baskets of laundry. That was her world, a humble fishing village on the banks of the Luo River, where life was hard but simple. She had never dreamed that her laughter, carried on the river wind, might catch the ear of a passing official. But fate has a strange sense of humor, doesn't it? One day she was washing clothes with her sisters, and the next, soldiers came. Their armor clinked, their boots sank into the mud, and their voices announced that the emperor required new maidens for service. Her neighbors whispered, "What fortune? The lotus girl will live in a palace of gold." Fortune, such a cruel word. The journey to the capital was long and silent. Each girl rode in a closed carriage, as if already hidden from the world. Lianhua clutched her embroidered pouch, fingers trembling. Inside, that pressed lotus petal had grown fragile, veins like threads of silver. Her mother had pressed it into her hand at the riverbank. "Do not forget where you came from," she said, her eyes wet. "The lotus grows in mud, yet rises pure above the water. Be the lotus, my child." In the palace, her name was stripped away, replaced with titles and numbers. Yet in her heart, she clung to Lianhua. A lotus cannot be renamed simply because it blooms in another pond. She was not the most beautiful among the girls. Some glittered like jade statues, with skin pale as porcelain, lips painted like ripe cherries. Lianhua's beauty was softer, more human, her smile uncertain, her eyes dark pools that reflected both fear and quiet strength. And perhaps it was this very softness that made her stand out, for softness in such a cruel place became a kind of defiance. Her first days in the harem were bewildering. She learned to walk with tiny steps, her shoes clicking against polished stone. She learned to bow so low her forehead nearly brushed the floor. She learned silence was safer than speech. The eunuchs barked instructions, the senior concubine sneered at her countryside manners, and yet when she lay in her chamber at night, she could still hear the river. It whispered through her dreams, reminding her she had not always belonged to the dragon throne. And so began the waiting. Every girl awaited her test. Some pretended confidence, laughing too loudly, painting their lips to rate. Others prayed fervently, clutching talismans and whispering incantations. But everyone knew the truth. The outcome often had less to do with purity and more to do with politics. A rival's bride could tip the scales, a eunuch's jealousy could doom you. Innocence alone could not protect you, yet Lianhua had something the others lacked, a memory of freedom. While many concubines had been raised in noble houses, groomed from childhood to please powerful men, she had once been wild, barefoot, singing to river reeds. That memory gave her a strange kind of courage. She thought, if I lived without silk once, I can do it again. She did not yet know how dangerous that thought would become. On her fourth night in the palace, something curious happened. As she walked through the moonlit courtyard, Clutching her pouch, she noticed a boy staring at the fish pond. He was not dressed like a eunuch, nor armored like a guard. He wore scholar's robes, his hair tied neatly, and his face illuminated by the lantern's glow. When their eyes met, he startled, as if caught stealing. She bowed quickly, lowering her gaze, but his whisper reached her. "Do you know," he said softly, "that carp leap 3 times before they become dragons? And yet most drown, unseen." She did not answer, she could not. But those words lodged in her mind, like a thorn beneath silk. A stranger had spoken to her in riddles, and in this palace, riddles were often safer than truths. She hurried back to her chamber, the lotus petal pressed hard against her heart. Who was that beau? She would not know his name until later. But fate, as always, had already woven their threads together. The other girls noticed her quietness. Some mocked it. "The river rat doesn't even know how to bow properly." Others feared it. "She doesn't speak because she's clever. Watch her." But Lianhua had no plans of intrigue, at least not yet. She was simply surviving, step by trembling step. Still, whispers of her presence reached ears that matter. One eunuch muttered to another, "The emperor favors innocence. That one she carries herself like untouched silk." Another reply, "But innocence is fragile." One rumor, "And she's finished." Ah, rumors, the palace breathed them like incense. One day you were a rising lotus, the next, you were trampled mud. And already, shadows had begun to circle Lianhua. As she lay awake that night, she wondered, would the emperor's gaze ever find her? Would her fate be sealed by hands she could not see? She touched the lotus petal again and whispered into the darkness, "I am still me." Little did she know, the palace was already watching. And soon, she would face not just the test, but the beginning of a game that would demand more than purity. It would demand her very soul. The palace had many rules, but none as powerful as the ones whispered in the dark. And among the servants, the lowest maid scrubbing marble floors, the cooks stirring endless pots of rice, the washerwomen rinsing silks in cold basins, there existed a story, older than the Sui itself. They called it the tale of the moonlit midwife, a goddess who tested purity not with hands, but with truth itself. The story went like this. Long ago, in a village swallowed by reeds and fog, a young bride was forced into marriage with a cruel lord. On her wedding night, the lord accused her of deceit, claiming she was not pure. He sent for the midwife of the moon, a woman said to walk only when the world slept. Cloaked in white, she entered the chamber, touched the bride's forehead, and whispered, "Truth cannot be hidden. Your body is not the test, the heart is." The cruel lord laughed, demanding proof, but the midwife only lifted her hand. In the candlelight, a lotus bloomed from the bride's palm, petals opening with a fragrance no lie could imitate. The lord, humiliated, fled the village. The bride was free, and the midwife vanished into moonlight, never seen again. The lesson was simple. Purity was not measured by flesh, but by spirit. And yet, in the Sui palace, the story was twisted. Eunuchs mocked it as a fairy tale, concubines clung to it as desperate hope, and old servants muttered it as a warning. "The midwife of the moon walks here too," one maid whispered to another. "If you lied, she will bloom a lotus in your hand, or she will wither your heart." It was nonsense, of course, or was it? One evening, Lianhua overheard two laundry women retelling the tale. "Their hands run silk as they whisper. They say one girl, long before us, passed the emperor's test not because of the physician's words, but because a lotus petal appeared on her lips. The emperor declared it proof of her chastity, or proof of her luck." The other snorted. "Do you think gods meddle in these halls? These walls choke even spirits." Still, the story wound itself around Lianhua's heart like a vine. She touched her pouch, the pressed lotus petal inside, and wondered. Was her mother's gift coincidence, or a quiet protection? Did the midwife of the moon still wander palace shadows, unseen? As nights deepened, the tale became more than a story, it became a weapon. Older concubines used it to terrify the new girls. "Beware," one sneered. "If your heart hides sin, you'll wake with a lotus burned onto your skin. The emperor will see it and know." The younger girls gasped, clutching talismans, praying to gods they half believed in. But some took it differently. "If the midwife exists," one whispered, "then maybe innocence can be proven, no matter what lies are told about us." Double quotes hope, like fear, spread quickly in the silken halls. And in this fragile balance of hope and terror, Lianhua found herself caught. The story reminded her of her village, of her mother's words. The lotus grows in mud, yet rises pure. Perhaps the midwife was no goddess at all, but a reminder purity could not be dictated by emperors. Purity was a choice to endure, to rise. Meanwhile, the palace machinery ground on. Eunuchs prepared the next round of tests. Scribes recorded every whisper, and rivals sharpened their glances like knives. For Lianhua, the old tale was more than comfort. It was a quiet rebellion, a belief that somewhere, somehow, truth could rise above deceit. But in a palace built on suspicion, truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. And soon, both gods and mortals would test just how much truth Lianhua could carry. The moon rose over the harem that night, silver light spilling across rooftops. Somewhere in the silence, a breeze stirred. And in her chamber, Lianhua dreamt of a white-clad midwife stepping across lotus ponds, whispering her name. When she awoke, the pressed petal in her pouch seemed brighter than before. Coincidence, perhaps. Or maybe, just maybe, the old midwife was closer than anyone dared to believe. The day of the test arrived with the heaviness of thunder before a storm. Servants scurried through the halls like ants, carrying trays of incense, bolts of fresh silk, and basins filled with rose water. Lanterns were lit though it was still daylight, their glow turning the palace corridors into rivers of gold. Every concubine knew what the ceremony meant, every concubine feared it. They called it the Jade Mirror Ceremony, not because there was an actual mirror of jade though the emperor had plenty of those, but because the test was meant to reflect the truth of a girl's purity. At least, that was the official phrasing whispered among eunuchs. In practice, it was far more humiliating. The concubines were led one by one into a chamber hidden behind embroidered curtains. Inside, a long table draped in crimson waited, the edges lined with offerings of fruit and candles. The emperor himself did not attend. He rarely sullied his gaze with such things. Instead, the task fell to court physicians and midwives, overseen by trusted eunuchs. Their job was simple: declare the girl pure or tainted. Their verdict was final, their words unquestioned. Lianhua stood in line, her breath shallow, her fingers clutching the pouch with its fragile lotus petal. Around her, other girls whispered prayers under their breath. One fainted before even entering the chamber and was dragged away, like a broken doll. Another emerged pale as wax, her eyes hollow, as though part of her had been left on that jade-draped table. The ceremony was not uniform. Sometimes it involved physical examination, invasive and cold. Other times it was purely symbolic, requiring the girl to walk barefoot across a polished slab of jade, the belief being that impurity would stain the stone. Of course, jade never changed color, but the girl's trembling often betrayed her, and the midwives needed little excuse to condemn her if rumor already hung heavy. That afternoon, the eunuchs prepared something unusual. They brought forth a large bronze mirror, polished so bright it seemed to glow. A girl was made to stand before it, stripped of her jewels and outer robe, forced to let the mirror reveal her truth. If her reflection wavered, they said, her heart was false. If her gaze held steady, she was pure. The science of it, zero. The symbolism, enormous. Rumor spread that the emperor sometimes peeked through a hidden screen, watching. Whether true or not, the fear it inspired was real. Every girl acted as though heaven itself weighed her soul on those scales. When Lianhua's turn came, her knees threatened to collapse. The eunuch's voice echoed, sharp as a whip. Step forward, she bowed, her forehead nearly grazing the marble floor, then rose and walked toward the mirror. Her reflection stared back, a village girl draped in white silk, eyes wide with fear, yet glinting with something stronger beneath. The midwife's gaze was hard, her fingers cold, as she adjusted Lianhua's posture. Look into the mirror, she ordered. Do not blink, do not waver. For a moment, Lianhua thought she might faint. Her pulse thundered louder than the temple drums. She felt her pouch hidden in her sleeve, the lotus petal pressing against her arm. And in that instant, she remembered her mother's words. The lotus rises above the mud. She raised her chin, her gaze steadied. The mirror reflected not fear, but quiet defiance. The midwives exchanged glances, one frowned, as though expecting her to falter. But she did not. A eunuch scribbled something on a parchment. Then, after what felt like eternity, the physician cleared his throat, pure. The word fell like a stone into water. Ripples of relief swept through her body. She bowed again, her heart racing. But in the silence, she caught something else, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of the physician's lips. Sympathy, perhaps, or something more dangerous, recognition. As she stepped back into the corridor, the other girls stared. Some with envy, some with relief, some with hatred. One girl whispered, "The mirror favors her." Another muttered, "No, the eunuchs favor her, she's clever." But Lian Hua knew the truth. It was neither mirror nor eunuch, it was the lotus. The memory of mud and river water had steadied her when the palace tried to break her. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her chamber, she could still hear the word echoing in her mind. Pure, it had saved her today. But tomorrow was a different game. Because purity in the palace was not a state, it was a currency. And once others learned she possessed it, they would want to steal it, twist it, or destroy it. Somewhere in the distance, a zither played softly, its notes bending like sighs. Outside, the moon hung heavy over the silken halls. And deep in her chest, Lian Hua realized she had survived the jade mirror ceremony. Yes, but surviving the palace itself would be far harder. The palace was not only filled with concubines and eunuchs. Behind its gilded doors lived another kind of prisoner scholars. Men trained in the classics, poets who could turn a sigh into verse, historians whose ink could outlast armies. They were fed well, clothed in silk, yet chained by fear. One wrong word and their tongues could be cut out, their families erased. Among them was Wei Shun, a junior scholar no older than 20, whose curiosity was as reckless as it was brilliant. He was the boy Lian Hua had glimpsed by the fish pond, whispering riddles about carp and dragons. He was not supposed to speak to her, nor she to him, yet palace walls had cracks, and words often slipped through. Wei Shun had grown disillusioned. He had read the Confucian texts, the Taoist verses, the histories of Han and Zhou, all extolling virtue and harmony. And yet here he was, forced to witness women lined up like cattle, judged by physicians and eunuchs under the guise of purity. To him, the virginity tests were not only absurd, they were an abomination against reason. But rebellion in the palace did not come with swords, it came with ink. Wei Shun began keeping secret notes, hidden in scrolls of poetry. He wrote of what he saw, the humiliation of the jade mirror ceremony, the terrors of the concubines, the hypocrisy of Emperor Yan's obsession with loyalty. He dared to ask questions even the walls feared to echo. If a man's power rests on suspicion, is he truly powerful? If a woman's worth is bound to her body, who is truly the prisoner? One evening, he passed near the women's quarters again, carrying scrolls. By chance or perhaps fate he dropped one. Lian Hua, walking back from the garden, picked it up. Before she could hand it back, her eyes caught a line of ink. The lotus grows in mud, but the emperor demands it be made of jade. She froze, her fingers tightened on the scroll. He noticed her gaze, panic flashing in his eyes. But instead of exposing him, she whispered, "You wrote this?" For a moment, silence, then, softly, "Yes." They should have parted then, but something passed between them, a recognition. Two prisoners in gilded cages, bound by different chains, but chains nonetheless. From that moment, their fates entwined. Wei Shun continued his work in shadows, his words dripping with quiet rebellion. He began slipping small notes into the cracks of the women's quarters, coded in poetry, warnings or comfort disguised as verse. To most, they were simply pretty words. To Lian Hua, they were a lifeline. She began to answer, subtly at first, a pressed title tucked into a scroll, a line of embroidery echoing his phrases. Their dialogue was silent, hidden, and dangerous. If caught, she would be accused of seduction, he of treason, but they risked it anyway. Because in a palace built on lies, truth, even whispered truth, was intoxicating. Meanwhile, the emperor grew more paranoid. Reports of rebellions in distant provinces reached his ears. He tightened his grip on the palace, demanding harsher tests, stricter rules, and more surveillance. Concubines who failed to smile correctly were dismissed. Eunuchs who hesitated in obedience were whipped. Fear thickened like incense smoke, choking everyone. Wei Shun saw it all, and his anger grew bolder. He no longer described only cruelty, he questioned its purpose. Some of his writings he dared to hide in the imperial archives, buried among harmless verses. Others he entrusted to a sympathetic physician, one who quietly agreed that history must remember truth. But rebellion, no matter how careful, has a scent. And in the silken hall, rumors spread quickly. A eunuch claimed he saw Wei Shun linger near the concubine's quarters. Another swore he found scraps of paper in the garden, inked with dangerous lines, suspicion sharpened like a blade. And Lianhua, she felt the blade too. Every look from the senior concubines grew sharper, every whisper seemed aimed at her back. She knew that if the emperor learned of her connection to the scholar, she would not only lose her place, she would lose her life. Yet when she closed her eyes at night, she heard his words. Not the commands of eunuchs, not the cold judgments of midwives, but his words, "The lotus grows in mud." Perhaps, she thought, that was enough reason to endure. But fate has little patience for endurance, it prefers storms. And soon, Wei Shun's ink would spill into a storm large enough to shatter both their worlds. By now, the palace had become a theater of whispers, and in theaters, ghosts always find their stage. The concubines, trapped in endless waiting, often turned to stories to explain what they could not endure. And among all the tales told in the silken halls, none was repeated more often than that of Lady Yun, the concubine who failed the test and returned to haunt those who condemned her. They said Lady Yun had once been radiant, a pearl among pearls. When her time came to face the jade mirror ceremony, she walked proudly, convinced her innocence would shine like polished jade. But fate, cruel as always, had other plans. A rival bribed the midwives, whispers poisoned the air, and Yun was declared impure. The verdict was death. Though softened with silk, the eunuchs claimed she fell ill and vanished within days. Yet on moonless nights, when the courtyard lamps guttered low, her shadow was said to return. Servants swore they saw a woman in white drifting among the lotus ponds, her face veiled, her hands stained red. Eunuchs reported hearing soft weeping behind doors that should have been locked. And once, a maid found lotus petals scattered on her pillow, though no flowers grew nearby. Of course, some scoffed. Nonsense, one physician said. Fear makes fools of us all. But others whispered that Lady Yun's spirit lingered, searching not for revenge, but for justice. She appeared only to those next in line for the test, as if to warn them. Do not trust jade. Do not trust mirrors, her ghost was said to murmur. Truth is not in their hands. For Lianhua, the tale struck like a drumbeat in her chest. She had passed her own test, yes, but fear does not vanish so easily. One night, walking through the courtyard under lantern glow, she felt the hairs on her neck rise. The air thickened, carrying the faint scent of lotus. She stopped. There, by the pond, stood a figure. White robes billowed though no wind stirred. A woman's silhouette, motionless, gazing into the water. Her breath caught. The figure turned slowly, face hidden behind a veil. And for an instant, just an instant, Lianhua thought she saw a pair of eyes, dark as sorrow, fixed upon her. Then the figure was gone. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the lotus petal inside her pouch. A dream, she whispered to herself, only a dream, but the pond rippled, though no stone had fallen. The next morning, the maids were in uproar. One swore she had heard sobbing by the west wall. Another claimed she saw blood smeared across the jade tiles. And though the eunuchs barked at them to be silent, the fear clung. When the next girl was led to the jade mirror, she fainted before even stepping inside. The ghost of Lady Yun became more than a story. It was a presence, an uninvited guest at every ceremony. Girls began to leave offerings at the pond, hairpins, silk ribbons, even drops of wine, begging the spirit to spare them. And while the emperor mocked such tales, ordering punishments for superstitious nonsense, even he grew restless. For late at night, alone in his chamber, he too had heard something, a soft rustle, like silk brushing stone. He never admitted it, of course. An emperor could not fear the dead, but his paranoia deepened. Lianhua, meanwhile, carried the memory of that night like a hidden wound. Was it truly a ghost she had seen? Or only her fear made flesh? She did not know. Yet something in her believed the story. Perhaps Lady Yun had indeed returned, not to terrify, but to remind them all. The tests were lies, and the truth would one day demand its due. That belief grew into a fire inside her. If a ghost could resist silence, so could the living. And so, even as whispers of Lady Yun's shadow circled through the palace, Lianhua began to steel herself not only for survival, but for resistance. For in the Sui Palace, the living feared the emperor, but But the dead feared no one. If history has taught us anything, it is this: power rarely makes men calm. More often, it makes them suspicious, restless, and afraid of shadows. Emperor Yang of Sui was no exception. He had inherited the throne with grandeur, expanded canals, raised palaces, and summoned scholars to sing his praises. But beneath his jade crown, paranoia gnawed like a hungry rat. He trusted no one, not his generals, who commanded armies to loyal to themselves, not his ministers, whose pens could cut as sharply as swords, and least of all, not the women in his palace. In his mind, a concubine's body was not just flesh, but a political frontier. To him, loyalty could be proven only if a woman's chastity was untouched before she entered his service. The virginity tests were less about purity than about control, about binding women to him so completely that even their pasts were erased. This obsession came from more than vanity. Historians note that Yan had grown up in a court where whispers of betrayal ran rampant. His own father, Emperor Wen, had risen through schemes and intrigue, discarding rivals with ruthless efficiency. Yang had learned young that trust was a luxury he could not afford. He carried that lesson into his reign, turning suspicion into law, and ritual into weapon. The ghost stories of Lady Yun reached him too, though cloaked in whispers. Did he believe them? Likely not, but he exploited them. He encouraged the eunuchs to spread tales of divine judgment, reminding concubines that heaven itself watched their conduct. If the women feared ghosts, so much the better. Fear was another leash. And yet, even with all his control, Yan could not sleep soundly. He woke in the night sweating, convinced assassins lurked behind curtains. He doubled the guard at his chambers, ordered his food tasted 3 times, and demanded the concubines undergo more frequent inspections. It was said he once dismissed an entire group of women after a single rumor, sending them back to their villages in disgrace, or, some whispered, to their deaths in the river. To outsiders, the emperor seemed a god wrapped in yellow silk, seated high on a dragon throne. But inside, he was a man haunted by the idea that loyalty could never truly be bought. Every ceremony, every test, was a futile attempt to prove otherwise. Lian, who had felt this paranoia trickled down like poisoned rain. The palace grew harsher after her test. Meals were scrutinized, movements restricted. Even the gardens, once a place of whispered relief, became watch corridors where eunuchs lurked behind trees. Concubines who once gossiped freely now spoke in careful phrases, their laughter brittle as glass. One evening, as the emperor strolled the lotus gardens, he stopped near the pond. His reflection shimmered in the water, distorted by ripples. He stared long, as if expecting something or someone to rise. "Do you think they lie to me?" he asked a eunuch at his side. The eunuch dropped to his knees, forehead pressed to stone. "Never, Your Majesty. They are loyal. They are pure." Yan smiled faintly, though his eyes did not soften. "Purer," he repeated, as though the word were an incantation he didn't quite believe. That night, Wei Shun, the scholar, recorded in his hidden notes, "An emperor who doubts purity doubts his own power." His tests are not trials of women, but trials of himself. But doubt breeds cruelty. The emperor's paranoia pushed him toward decisions that would one day unravel his dynasty. For when a ruler sees treachery everywhere, he creates enemies even where none existed. And so, while the empire outside strained under heavy taxes and forced labor, the palace turned into a crucible of fear. Concubines prayed not for favor, but for invisibility. Eunuchs schemed for scraps of influence. And in the middle of it all, Lianhua clutched her lotus petal, wondering if even the emperor himself was more prisoner than master. The irony was cruel, wasn't it? The man with absolute power was also the most terrified soul in the palace. And the women who were supposed to be powerless were the ones who truly carried the empire's secrets in their silken sleeves. History is not a neat ledger. It is a patchwork quilt, sewn by hands with different motives. And when it comes to the virginity tests of the Sui Dynasty, the quilt is particularly frayed. Here lies one of the great controversies. Did these tests ever truly exist as official policy, or were they a later invention, embroidered by hostile chroniclers eager to blacken Emperor Yang's name? On one hand, Tang historians, who succeeded the Sui, painted Yang as a tyrant drunk on excess. They wrote of golden palaces, of wasteful wars, and of women paraded like cattle for his amusement. Their accounts speak of humiliating rituals, examinations cloaked in incense and shame, of concubines judged by midwives while eunuchs stood watch. These stories match the jade mirror ceremony whisper in folk memory. But on the other hand, scholars today raise an eyebrow. After all, virginity tests, at least in the invasive, ritualized form, are not well documented in official Sui records. Could it be that Tang chroniclers exaggerated, inventing lurid details to justify the fall of their predecessor dynasty? Perhaps, after all, history loves villains. And what villain is more compelling than a paranoid emperor humiliating young women under the guise of loyalty? Still, fragments remain that suggest something darker. In medical texts from the era, there are cryptic references to examining the body for truth. Court poems speak in veiled tones about purity reflected in jade and loyalty tested by mirrors, too poetic to be procedure, perhaps, but not too poetic to hint at reality. Imagine yourself in a candlelit hall. The physicians declare a girl's worth with a single phrase. Does it matter if the test was medical, symbolic, or merely ritual? To the women who lived it, the result was the same: life or disgrace, favor or oblivion. Wei Shun, in his secret notes, scoffed at the entire premise: the body cannot reveal loyalty. A heart may be faithful though touched, and a virgin may betray with her tongue as easily as another with her hand. Yet the emperor binds his fate to a phantom truth, mistaking fear for devotion. It is tempting, isn't it, to imagine that the virginity tests were nothing more than propaganda? That the stories of Lady Yun, of the Jade Mirror, were simply ways for later dynasties to point at Yuan and say, "See, this is what happens when power corrupts." Yet even if the details blurred, the essence remained: control of women's bodies as a tool of imperial paranoia. And here is where blood and silk intertwine. Some argue that the tests may have been more theatrical than medical. A performance designed not to prove chastity, but to reinforce the emperor's dominance. The girl trembles, the eunuch declares, the court watches, and everyone is reminded of where power resides. So, was it medicine? Was it theater? Was it rumor? The truth may never be untangled, but perhaps that is the point. The very ambiguity is what makes the story linger. For whether the tests were flesh or fable, their shadow haunted generations. And tonight, their shadow haunts us too, whispering questions in the dark. What is purity? Who has the right to measure it? And what kind of emperor builds his throne on the trembling of young girls? The debate remains, dusty in books and whispered among historians. But in the palace of Lianhua's time, it was no debate at all. It was reality, or at least, it was treated as such. And when power treats rumor as reality, reality bends to match it. Thus, the blood on the marble and the silk draped across trembling shoulders become one story, stitched together by fear. And in that stitched story, Lianhua must still find a way to survive. Fear has a way of sharpening instincts. In the Sui Palace, concubines quickly learned that survival was not about beauty alone. It was about alliances, whispers, and the subtle weaving of trust where no trust could safely exist. And so, out of the silken halls and trembling nights, a hidden pact was born. It began with 3 women: Lianhua, Mei, Anzan. Mei was Sharp-Eye, daughter of a merchant ruined by taxes, sent into the palace not for honor but as payment. Zan was older, her family disgraced when her father lost a battle. Her presence in the harem meant as both humiliation and penance. Each had tasted bitterness before silk ever touched their skin. At first, they eyed each other with suspicion. After all, every concubine was a rival, every smile could hide a dagger. But one evening, as lanterns flickered low in the women's quarters, Mei whispered what many thought but few dared to say: "We cannot survive alone." Lianhua, clutching her pouch with the lotus petal, hesitated. Trust was dangerous. Yet something in Mei's eyes tired, fierce, unyielding pulled her forward. "What do you propose?" she asked softly. Zan leaned closer, her voice rough with years of bitterness. "We watch each other's backs, share what we hear. If one of us is accused, the others swear in her defense, a chain. If one falls, we pull her up." It was reckless, it was desperate, and yet, it was the only shield they had against a system designed to pit them against one another. So, under the glow of a single candle, the 3 pressed their palms together, whispering a vow. Not of loyalty to the emperor, but of loyalty to one another. The pact grew quietly, others joined to maids, weary of watching girls vanish without cause. a young eunuch, too gentle for the cruelty demanded of him. Their circle was not large, but it was enough. They exchanged coded glances, subtle nods, scraps of information that seemed meaningless until strung together. One night, Mei discovered that a rival concubine had bribed a eunuch to spread rumors against Sin. Before the whispers reached the midwives, Lianhua intercepted them, pretending innocence, distracting the eunuch with questions about the jade mirror. The rumor withered before it bloomed. Zhen's life was spared not by purity, but by pact. The women began to trust again, not in the emperor, not in the rituals, but in one another. They shared food when rations were cut. They stitched secret symbols into their robes to signal danger. They told stories to keep fear at bay, sometimes even laughing, a rare sound in those suffocating walls. But alliances are dangerous, a place that thrives on division. And soon, the pact attracted attention. A senior concubine, Li Hua, noticed the subtle closeness of the three. Her smile grew thin. One evening, she leaned toward another rival and whispered, "See how the river girl plays. She builds her own court within his." And so, the circle that gave strength also painted a target. Meanwhile, Wei Shun, the scholar, observed from the shadows. He saw Lianhua speak with Mei and Zhen in hushed tones, saw the flicker of resistance in their eyes. He knew what they were doing, though he dared not approach. Instead, he wrote in his secret notes, "Even in chains, the spirit of rebellion blooms like lotus after rain." The pact did not promise safety, it did not erase fear. But for the first time, Lianhua felt less alone. She was not merely surviving, she was resisting, however quietly. Still, in a palace where the emperor trusted no one, even the whisper of resistance was dangerous. And their secret chain, forged in shadows, was about to be tested harder than any jade mirror could. If palaces are chessboards, then every concubine is a piece, pawns, queens, and sometimes hidden daggers waiting in silk sleeves. And among those pieces was one whose presence cast a shadow larger than most, Lady Xian, daughter of the disgraced General Han. Her father had once commanded armies for the Sui, leading campaigns with banners that snapped proudly in the wind. But failure is a crime no emperor forgives. After losing a crucial battle against Goguryeo, the general was stripped of titles, his estate seized, his family scattered. Only his daughter was spared execution, not out of mercy, but humiliation. She was sent into the harem, a reminder to all who walked the marble floors that even the mighty could be reduced to ornaments. Lady Xian was no ordinary girl. She carried herself not as a concubine but as a warrior's heir, her chin lifted, her gaze sharp enough to slice jade. She wore her silks like armor, her jewels like weapons. And though she bowed to the emperor, her eyes never fully lowered. The other women feared her. Some admired her defiance, others despised her for it. She had no allies, nor did she seek any. Rumors swirled that she whispered curses against the throne, that she kept a dagger hidden in her chamber, that she swore one day her family's honor would be restored. When Lady Xian crossed paths with Lianhua, sparks struck instantly. The river girl with her quiet resilience, and the general's daughter with her burning pride, they were bound to clash. It began with whispers. "The river rat thinks he's clever," Lady Xian said one evening, her voice dripping with disdain. But cleverness does not survive long here. Meinzen stiffened, but Lianhua held her tongue. She knew better than to feed fire with words. Yet silence was not surrender. Lady Xian noticed the subtle bond between Lianhua and her companions. She saw their coded glances, their shared laughter, their pact. And to her, it reeked of rebellion, not against the emperor, but against the hierarchy of the harem itself. One night, under the lantern glow of the lotus garden, Lady Xian approached Lianhua directly. "You think you're safe because you passed the mirror," she said, her voice low, her eyes glinting. "But purity does not protect you. Loyalty does not protect you. Power does, and you have none." Lianhua met her gaze, heart pounding, but her voice was steady. "Power is not always shown in swords or crowns. Sometimes it hides in silence. Sometimes it grows where no one expects." The exchange spread through the palace like wildfire. By dawn, every concubine had heard. The river girl dared to speak against the general's daughter. Lines were drawn, some whisper admiration for Lianhua's courage. Others warned that Lady Xian's wrath was not something to invite. And yet, something curious happened. Lady Xian, though outwardly scornful, began to watch Lianhua more closely. Her insults grew sharper. Yes, but her interest deepened. Some suspected she sought to break the girl. Others wondered if, deep inside, she recognized a spark she herself once carried before bitterness consumed her. One evening, Zin confided in Lianhua, "She despises you because you remind her of what she lost. She was once hope, like you. Now she is only fire and ash. But fire, my friends, can both destroy and protect." And soon, Lady Xian's flames would burn paths no one could predict. For when the emperor's paranoia turned its eye sharper, when whispers of rebellion echoed outside the palace walls, Lady Xian would find herself with a choice: to let her pride consume her, or to wield it as a weapon in a struggle larger than herself. And in that struggle, Lianhua's fate and perhaps the fate of the secret pact would be bound to the daughter of disgrace. In every empire, truth often survives not in the grand proclamations of kings, but in the quiet scribbles of those who serve in shadows. In the Sui Palace, that truth was kept alive by a man whose name history nearly forgot: Physician Gao. Dr. Gao was no ordinary healer. He had studied herbs and acupuncture in the mountains, trained under Taoist masters who believed that balance, not fear, sustained the body. But when the emperor summoned him to serve in the palace, balance was a luxury he could no longer practice. Here, medicine bent to politics. A girl's health mattered less than her appearance. Her life mattered less than her purity. Yet Gao's conscience would not stay silent. Each time he was ordered to oversee the jade mirror ceremony, his brush itched for truth. He began keeping hidden notes, written not on official scrolls, but on scraps of bamboo and silk, tucked away in hollowed books of herbal lore. He recorded everything: the trembling of concubines, the pressure from eunuchs, the whispers of bribes, the falseness of the tests. The mirror shows nothing, one note read. It reflects only fear. Purity cannot be seen in flesh. This ritual is cruelty disguised as ceremony. Another entry was darker. Lady Undeclare, impure though innocent. Her tears fell like blood. That night, she vanished. Rumor says she wanders still. If ghosts walk, they walk because we make them. Physician Gao was careful. He disguised his writings in medical metaphors. A concubine falsely accused became a withered lotus. An honest eunuch's silence became a root cut from the earth. He knew if his notes were discovered, his life would end. Yet he believed that someday, perhaps long after the Sui Dynasty itself crumbled, someone would find them and know the truth. His secret habits soon brushed against Lianhua's life. After her successful test, Ga had been the one to speak the word pure. That faint smile she saw, it had been real. He recognized in her something more than fear. He saw resistance, quiet but steady, like a lotus rising through mud. One evening, when summoned to tend to her supposed fatigue, Gao risked a subtle gift. As he checked her pulse, he slipped a folded scrap beneath her sleeve. When she later opened it, in the solitude of her chamber, her breath caught. Written in tiny, hurried strokes were the words: "You are not alone. Fear is their weapon. Truth is ours." The message shook her. Was this a trap, a test by the eunuchs? But the brushstrokes bore the same calmness she remembered in his eyes. And at the bottom, drawn in faint ink, was the shape of a lotus. From that night, a fragile thread bound her to the physician. She did not answer directly, too dangerous, but she began leaving subtle signals. A petal tucked into her robe when she saw him, a faint nod when their eyes met across the courtyard. He understood. Meanwhile, his notes grew bolder. He began to document not just ceremonies, but the emperor's paranoia, the endless fear consuming the palace. "Yon builds walls of jade," he wrote, "but inside those walls, the air rots. An empire cannot be sustained on suspicion alone." Some nights, he dreamed of escaping, of carrying his scrolls beyond the walls and showing the world the truth. But he knew his place. He was bound as tightly as the concubines, his fate sealed by duty. All he could do was write and pray that ink might outlast tyranny. Lianhua, clutching his words, found new courage. She told Mei Enzin of that hidden physician. "Though not his name, there are others," she whispered. "Even among them, we are not the only ones who see." For the pact of concubines was one thing, but to know that a man, sworn to serve the emperor, risked his life for truth, that was something greater. And so, in the shadows of the silken hall, ink and whispers formed a second rebellion. Small, fragile, but growing. One day, those hidden notes might change the way history remembered the Sui. But first, They had to survive the storm that was coming. The palace, for all its fear, still celebrated beauty. And so came the annual Lantern Festival, when courtyards bloomed with light and music, when concubines floated through moonlit gardens like drifting blossoms, and when the emperor himself emerged to bask in the splendor of his court. That year, the festival shimmered brighter than ever. Lanterns shaped like dragons and phoenixes hung from every rooftop. Floating lotus lamps glided across the ponds, their flames flickering like stars fallen into water. Silk dancers spun in the courtyards, their sleeves like wings, while zithers hummed soft melodies to the night. But beneath the beauty lurked tension. Everyone knew the emperor's paranoia had deepened. Everyone knew his suspicions burned hotter than the lantern flames. And everyone whispered that the festival, instead of a celebration, might become a stage for his next decree. Lianhua and her companions walked together, their robes heavy with jewels, their eyes watching every shadow. Mei muttered under her breath, "He'll use tonight to test us again. I can feel it." Zhen nodded grimly. The emperor cannot enjoy Zhou, he twists it into fear. Yet for a fleeting moment, Lianhua let herself breathe. She gazed at the glowing lanterns rising into the night sky, each carrying prayers written in delicate calligraphy. She remembered the riverbank festivals of her village, when she and her sisters would laugh as they tried to catch drifting lanterns before they vanished into the dark. For an instant, she was a child again, free of jade and marble. Then came the omen. As the emperor stepped into the courtyard, surrounded by eunuchs and guards, a sudden gust of wind swept through the palace. Dozens of lanterns shook loose from their strings, tumbling down in cascades of fire and silk. Gasps erupted as flames licked at the silk banners, sparks scattering across marble floors. Concubines screamed. Clutching their robes, guards scrambled to contain the blaze. In the chaos, one lantern struck near Lianhua's feet. Its paper tore, revealing the message written inside. "Truth cannot be bound." She froze. That was no common prayer. It was a phrase she had seen before, Wei Shun's words, hidden in his scrolls. Her heart thundered. How had it appeared here, in a festival lantern? Had he dared to slip his message into the very heart of the emperor's celebration? The fire was quickly doused, but the air remained electric. The emperor's face darkened, suspicion etched deep. "Sabotage," he muttered. "Someone defies me even here." His gaze swept over the women, the scholars, the servants, every eye lowered, every breath held. Later that night, as the court dispersed, Lianhua lingered by the pond. She found another lantern, half-burned, its message still intact. "The lotus rises, again." Wei Shun's hand. He was sending her a signal, bold and reckless, perhaps too reckless. Mei Ensign found her clutching the charred paper. "What is it?" Mei whispered. Lianhua hesitated, then folded the paper tight. "A warning," she said, "and a promise." But the falling lanterns had lit more than just the sky. They had ignited suspicion. The emperor ordered investigations. Eunuchs prowled the halls at night, searching chambers, questioning servants. One wrong glance, one careless whisper, could condemn them all. And yet, within the terror, the pact of concubines grew stronger. In the flicker of firelight, they understood. Resistance was no longer whispers in shadows. It had spilled into the open air, carried by flames and lanterns. That night, Lianhua did not dream of ghosts or tests. She dreamed of fire rising into the sky, carrying words that could not be silenced. And when she awoke, she knew. The emperor's paranoia had turned a festival into a battlefield. The time of quiet endurance was ending. The night of falling lanterns was not just omen, it was beginning. The days after the lantern festival were colder, though spring pressed against the palace gates. Emperor Yan's paranoia thickened into decree. Another round of virginity tests, harsher than before, as if purity itself could quench rebellion. To him, the falling lanterns were not chance but conspiracy. And in his twisted logic, it was the women, always the women, who must prove themselves again. The announcement struck the harem like thunder. Some concubines wailed openly, others fell into stony silence. For Lianhua, the words felt like a blade pressing against her throat. She had already passed once, but passing again was no guarantee. Rumors swirled. This time, the test would be different, more invasive, impossible to fake. The night before, she sat with Mei Ensign in their chamber, the single candle flickering. Mei clutched her hand. "You must not falter. They want to break us. If they break you, They break all of us, Zhen added, her voice hushed. Remember the pact. If one falls, the others pull her up, we swore it. But Lianhua could not silence her fear. Not of failure, no, she feared something worse. She feared what the emperor might do if he saw her resilience as defiance. Passing was no longer safety. Passing could make her a target. The morning came, she was led again to the chamber, its walls draped in crimson, the bronze mirror gleaming under lantern light. The eunuchs stood like vultures, the midwives like executioners. And at the center, for the first time, Emperor Yan himself sat behind a carved screen, his shadow looming across the silk. Step forward, a eunuch barked. Lianhua's legs trembled, she clutched her pouch, hidden in her sleeve, the lotus petal pressing into her skin. She bowed low, then stood before the mirror. Her reflection stared back pale, trembling, but alive. The midwife approached, her voice cold. The emperor demands truth. If you are pure, the mirror will hold your gaze. If you are false, it will shatter. Of course, the mirror could not shatter. But fear made illusions real. Lianhua steadied her breath. In the silence, she whispered in her heart, the lotus rises above the mud. She lifted her chin, eyes locking with her reflection. The hall seemed to dissolve. She saw not the emperor's shadow, not the eunuch's glare, not the midwife's hands. She saw only herself, the girl from the riverbank, the child who once laughed in lotus fields. And then, something happened. A faint breeze stirred the curtains, though no window was open. The bronze mirror caught the candlelight, and for a moment, her reflection shimmered. Some swore they saw a lotus bloom faintly across the glass, petals unfolding in golden light. Others whispered that Lady Yun's ghost stood behind her, hand on her shoulder, steadying her. The midwife gasped. Stepping back, the eunuchs froze. From behind the screen, the emperor leaned forward. What is this? He demanded. The physician Gout, standing among them, seized the moment. Your Majesty, he said firmly, this is heaven's sign. The girl is not only pure, she is chosen. To question her is to question the will of heaven. The room erupted in whispers, the eunuchs bowed hastily, murmuring agreement. The midwives nodded, eyes wide with fear. No one dared oppose the physician's bold claim, not when the emperor himself hesitated. For Yan, paranoid though he was, still feared omens. To punish Lianhua now, after such a spectacle, might brand him as defying heaven itself. At last, he spoke. Very well, she is pure. More than pure, she is favored. The word sealed her fate. She had not only survived, she had become untouchable. Or so it seemed. But in the palace, favor was as dangerous as disgrace. The concubines now saw her not as one of them, but as a rival marked by heaven, means in fear what envy might bring. Lady Xian, the general's daughter, narrowed her eyes, perhaps seeing in Lianhua both a threat and a tool. And outside the chamber, Wei Shun heard the rumors. He smiled bitterly as he wrote in his hidden notes, when heaven's sign appears in the palace, it is not heaven speaking, but fear bending to survive. So, was it a miracle? A trick of candlelight? A ghost's mercy? Or perhaps only the imagination of terrified onlookers desperate for meaning? Historians still argue, calling it another controversy of the Sui. But for Lianhua, the truth was simpler. In that moment, with the lotus pressed to her heart, she had refused to let fear break her. And whether ghost, omen, or chance, something had answered. Yet survival has a cruel price, for now the emperor watched her more closely than ever. And the silken hull, already thick with envy, sharpened its claws. The test had changed everything. Lianhua's so-called miracles spread through the palace faster than incense smoke. By evening, every corridor hummed with whispers, the girl who summoned a lotus in the emperor's mirror, the concubine heaven favored. Some trembled with awe, others with envy. In the harem, such stories were not blessings, weapons each retelling sharpened into rumor, each rumor twisted into poison. Lady Xian was the first to act, daughter of a general, her rank already set her above most. But now she sensed her position threatened. One afternoon she summoned her attendants and spoke with icy calm. A girl of low birth steals heaven's favor. Impossible, either she deceived the mirror, or Gao deceived the emperor. Find me proof. Her words set off a quiet war. Spies passed notes and her lacquered trays. Servants listened at doorways, carrying tales between rivals like bees carrying pollen, though this pollen bred only poison. Lianhua, meanwhile, felt the weight of every gaze. She could not walk the gardens without hearing rustling laughter behind her. Some concubines bowed deeper than before, others looked away with clenched jaws. Even Mei, once her closest ally, grew quiet, as if uncertain whether friendship with a chosen one would shield her or endanger her. Zhen, ever blunt, warned her, "They will not forgive you for what happened. They will smile, yes, but their knives are hidden in silk." One night, when the moon was thin, Lianhua was summoned unexpectedly not by the emperor, but by consort Han, the eldest among them. Han was a survivor of 3 reigns, her beauty faded but her influence sharp as a blade. She received Lianhua in her chambers, where sandalwood smoke curled through dim light. "Child," she said, her voice low but steady, "do you know why the emperor spares you?" Lianhua bowed, murmuring, "Because heaven showed a sign." Han's lips curved in something between pity and disdain. "No, because men fear what they cannot explain. Today you are heaven's omen, tomorrow you may be heaven's curse. The emperor keeps you close not out of trust, but suspicion." Her words struck harder than any insult. Han continued, "If you wish to live, do not bask in this light, hide within it, learn silence. Let others burn themselves in jealousy while you remain still." Lianhua left with her heart heavy. She thought of Yun, whose ghostly lotus had perhaps saved her, and wondered if Yun had also endured such whispers before her death. Outside the palace, Wei Shun wrote again in his secret notes, "The palace believes in miracles only when they serve survival. The emperor believes in omens only when they bind loyalty. And the women, trapped within, weave rumors thicker than silk to strangle one another. The truth drowns beneath layers of intrigue." Historians centuries later would debate whether the so-called lotus in the mirror is a turning point in Emperor Yang's reign or merely another hallucination of a paranoid court. Some records claim Gao staged the trick with hidden powders. Others insist Lady Yun's ghost truly intervened. And still others dismiss it as hysteria, a palace seeing what it needed to see. But one truth remains unchallenged. From that day, Lianhua's life was no longer her own. Every step she took, every glance she gave, was caught in a web of schemes, hers to survive, others to destroy. The lotus that had lifted her above the mud now threatened to drown her in it. Then MCC, in the storm of history, Lianhua's choice did not merely rescue a fleeting moment, it wove invisible threads through the fabric of the Sui Dynasty. To her contemporaries she was either a traitor or a savior, yet to later generations she became no more than a shimmering reflection on water, impossible to define. Han. Court historians recorded her with icy detachment. A concubine disturbed the emperor's heart, and destiny shifted, but in the villages, legend remembered her as the lone woman who dared to weigh her heart against the mandate of heaven. Children sang rhymes of a lotus falling into the lake, a symbol of sacrifice. Poets cloaked her name in verses about the tragic entanglement of power and passion. Whatever the truth, Lianhua's legacy endured not only in the Sui annals, but as a lingering shadow upon the dynasties that follow, a reminder that the fate of an empire could turn upon the fragile heart of a single soul. And as the tale closes, a question remains suspended. Did her choice truly alter history, or is it but memory embroidered by later hands? Perhaps more vital still, between truth and myth, what is it that humankind most longs to remember? 1,000 years later, by the waters where her reflection once trembled, the wind still stirs. Some claim to see a lotus blooming out of season. Others insist they hear a faint song, drifting like an echo from another age. History, in the end, is like a worn tapestry frayed at its edges, mended with invention. To those who look upon it now, the line between fact and dream has long since blurred, leaving only an aftertaste of wonder and sorrow. Perhaps that is the true power of memory, not to preserve shapes intact, but to live on in imagination. Like petals carried endlessly on the wind, her story outlives time itself, an unanswered question, a whisper that refuses to fade.